All right, I want to welcome everyone to the HCRC Lunchtime Talk Series. And we have an exciting panel here, and we want to have a sort of a whirlwind here in the next hour. And we're going to be talking about new opportunities in early childhood research, training, and service. And I think what we want to do, as I mentioned, sort of the whirlwind coverage is Judy and I are going to talk about some of the HCRC initiatives within the larger national landscape of early childhood priorities. Lisa Barnidge from the Minnesota Department of Human Services are going to talk about some of the enterprise and data work and linking families and services in Minnesota. Amanda Varley, who is the manager for the Preschool Development Grant at the Minnesota Department of Education, is going to talk about that grant and also data sharing opportunities that are being worked on across agencies. And I think, as I mentioned, we'll leave time for questions at the end. So in starting, just want to talk about some of the HCRC initiatives within this larger landscape, and then we'll go to the rest of the the talk and have a discussion at the end. I just want to mention as a frame here, the larger national frame is, as everyone knows, the American Families Plan was proposed by the Biden administration. Of course, it's making its way through Congress, and there's been a lot of changes recently. Nobody knows what the final plan is going to be approved will look like. But one thing is for sure is that a high priority in the American Families Plan is universal preschool for 3- and 4-year-olds. And in this plan is an allocation, unprecedented allocation of $200 billion of federal money for states to partner with the feds and also the districts to opt into universal preschool over the next 3 years, with the hope that after that, of course, that the states and districts would take over the financing of it. And of course, it's an opt-in system, so it is voluntary. So obviously, one underrated benefit is that it's no matter what passes, there's been a lot of attention to prioritize how do we work together across federal, state, the local communities, and with the university in better understanding what's working and how to make it work as things scale up. The second sort of underrated benefit, I think, is obviously any kind of universal system can't be in one system. So it means that systems have to be in concert, school districts, community centers, Head Starts, family-related centers and things. So there is a diversity and organization of delivery to ensure that high quality and that there's the capacity that's there. No one system can do it by itself. So obviously there's collaboration there at that level. And of course, I think a third underrated element, which I'm going to focus on in our remarks here, is there is a focus on program effectiveness, not just the effects of these scale up, but also how the elements are effective or not so effective in making sure that all children, gain benefits. And we know in Minnesota with the world's best workforce legislation, that it's legislatively sort of prioritize that all Minnesota children will enter school ready to learn, 100% school readiness rates. So obviously the focus on school readiness is very important. Now, let me just highlight this idea of evidence. The Minnesota Legislative Audit Bureau, did a report, as we all know, back in 2018. And quoting from this report is their February 2020 update, that I think that Minnesota has room to grow on effectiveness. And the quote from them from this report, this update, is that there's inadequate data on program effectiveness. Data in Minnesota do not exist to measure whether children statewide are ready for school, despite a state law with the goal that school districts meet the school readiness goal. And they're referring to the world's best workforce legislation there. And so I think this is important, states aware of it. Certainly, Lisa and Amanda may want to comment on this later, but I think there is a greater emphasis to try to address these gaps. And the gaps are a couple. One is that in evaluating, existing state investments in preschool programs is one thing, and that's sort of a gap that we need to fill. The other one is sort of the reporting requirements, so that any child in preschool programs, that the administrators in those centers are required to report back to the state. There is no current requirement that occur. It's a totally voluntary system. So I think there is room to grow here in this national conversation. The American Families Plan is to really push this to the forefront. Now, in our work in HCRC, just a couple of things. I want to emphasize that our emphasis in HCRC is to work with states and communities to better understand the effectiveness of early childhood programs and their elements, and to work on return on investment studies. In HCRC, you can go on we have a blog, an Evidence Matters blog, where we focus on these key elements and implementing these key elements, things like class size reduction, workforce, social emotional learning is a key element of programs. And that's a big emphasis. And of course, this broader focus on elements and programs that are effective and how to promote long-term success and well-being. And again, one of our new initiatives I just want to point out is we have these new initiatives in HCRC, being a human capital center, focus on things like wealth inequality, because the achievement gap not only leads to gaps in educational attainment, but it also leads to gap in economic well-being and just gaps in wealth inequality, which are much larger than the achievement gaps, and also on psychological well-being. Some of our team at HCRC, Isaac Bisla, Miranda Morency, are working on these in our group to kind of add to this conversation. Now, let me just highlight, I hope people can see this okay, just going to say briefly, because people know in the HCRC, we've developed a list of 10 essential elements of early childhood programs for 3- and 4-year-olds. And if you look at this list, what I've done, and I haven't really shown this before, is I'm plotting this against the 3-star evidence. And so 1 star would be there's limited evidence, some but not a lot of evidence. 2 stars would be there's moderate evidence. 3 stars would be boom, we're hitting all cylinders, there's great evidence that element is effective. And you can see here, just want to point out a couple things. The 2 that I think have the least amount of evidence that are essential for program effectiveness, I think certainly issues about accountability and how much that adds value to the effects that we have, that there's somewhat limited evidence there. And I think there's also limited in some ways controversial focus on comprehensive family services. But again, this is a relative dimension. On the other hand, though, things like beginning by age 4, having intensity and quality of learning, there's 3 stars. There's overwhelming evidence, over the last 50 years. So these are relative stars, and certainly
Dr. Reynolds, I think maybe we're seeing the wrong screen, sir.
Can you see this?
No, we can't. I'm at least seeing just the new opportunities for early childhood. Your first slide is all I'm seeing. I'm seeing your
Now can you see?
I'm not seeing a presentation screen. I'm seeing like your actual PowerPoint.
Okay, how about others? Are others able to see the PowerPoint?
No, Trupti's right. We cannot.
Just your title.
No. Nope.
No,
Yeah,
it's
we're
not.
just on the title page.
It's not forwarding? Okay. Let me try. Let me come back in. Right. Let me stop the share and then try it again. It's paused. Hold on. How about, can people see this? Now can you see?
Yes.
This
Yes,
looks good, I
absolutely.
think.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
Now can you see this?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
the
great.
evidence matters.
I just know
Yes.
that. Thanks for pointing that out. I guess
Yep.
I'm looking at something you're not seeing. So great. Okay, so let me just continue. And so I think the issue is the point is that there's gaps in the levels of evidence across these 10 elements. And I think there needs to be more of a focus on this. And that's what we're doing in HCRC. And let me just give you a couple of examples. I'm assuming people can see this okay. Now, in our work, in St. Paul Public Schools, as part of the expansion of the child parent centers that occurred over 2012 to 18 and is ongoing in many respects, what we did is we implemented the child parent center program in the St. Paul Public Schools and compared the child parent center program in preschool, which is really a 5-star program, compared to the existing St. Paul Public School district pre-K programs that are a 4-star program. And what we found in this implementation is that kids that got the CPC program based in matched schools, is that those CPC kids gained half a year or 0.5 standard deviation units, a gain in school readiness above and beyond kids in the St. Paul Public School program model. So we realized that there's something here. There's a combination of these 10 elements that you saw are all being implemented together. And again, in kindergarten, you can see there that 0.36, about a 4-month or nearly, nearly a half a year gain in kindergarten. So the gains were sustained. And then that evidence is consistent and really aligns with other evidence in Chicago that we've seen over the years as well. So obviously, what's making a difference is those elements, those 10 elements I mentioned are being really exhibiting themselves. And that when you scale programs and you maintain those elements, you get added value. Okay. And then I'm going to skip this slide. The only thing to talk about here is that the number of elements do matter. As the number of elements is an effective learning, like you have small class sizes, instructional approach that's intensive, strong teacher preparation. The more of those elements in terms of the classroom experiences that are present, the greater the level of school readiness. The more of these you have in place, the better it is. So there's a cumulative benefit. And I think, so that's the second example about these early learning experiences. The third thing I want to mention is parent involvement. I mentioned there's fairly limited evidence, but certainly in the CPC program, other programs, Head Start, there is strong evidence, but in a universal system, what's the role of parent involvement? And I think in the Midwest CPC expansion, we examined this in St. Paul and in Chicago, and what we found that this program that has all these elements increased parent involvement. So some of the work with Nishank Varshney and others in the HCRC, we found that relative to the usual district preschool, participants in CPC pre-K was associated with significantly higher parent involvement at the end of 2nd grade. And this was found both in St. Paul and Chicago. And so the idea here is to sustain effects. You're more likely to sustain those effects having a larger family approach in addition to a child education approach. So that's really, important. And so that's the third study. Now I want to give you just a sample of sort of the longer term perspective. So let's think about this again, the question here is evidence matters. If we implement universal or even a state preschool system for everyone, we want to make sure that we have the elements in place and the systems in place to show the benefits. But again, if you do that and you do it well, not only can you link to educational success and educational attainment, but there's a carryover effect to health outcomes. And in this study, this was recently published in a JAMA Network Open, myself, Stuart O, and others. And what we found was that by getting those early childhood gains on school readiness, that CPC preschool, and this is in the Chicago study, long-term study, that led to higher or more years of education, more likely to graduate from college. And that benefit carried over to reduced risk of heart disease. And this is measured by the Framingham risk score. And so if we're really successful in implementing strong early childhood programs and we can link to educational attainment is considered sort of the leading social determinant of health. And then we can get these carryover effects to health, which gives us a much greater return on investment. And that's a whole separate area. And education accounted for, nearly 25% of the effects that we see on health outcomes was accounted for by education. So that is another important dimension. In a broader way, as we look at effectiveness from a larger perspective, I think we need to take what's called the determinants of health, DOH, referred to determinants of health. These social structural determinants of health are important to provide a context of support for implementing early childhood programs and systems in place. And things like there's 5 elements of this in healthy people: economic mobility, having educational access and quality, healthcare access and quality, the neighborhood and built environment, and social community context. That last one are things we're a lot focused on in terms of things like neighborhood poverty or economic resources within the neighborhood, history of discrimination, both racial discrimination, ethnic discrimination. It's being really an important element to take into account to reduce these barriers. So I think this, looking at the overall systems, and we're looking at this providing a supportive organizational context. And if we do that, we can get these, synergies of benefits. And I think a couple more things. Now, that was sort of the research side of it. And of course, obviously, that links up to partnerships that we need to promote in the state that Lisa and Amanda will talk about. Let me just talk about service. And Judy's going to say something about sort of the training. Now, our approach in scaling services in this Midwest CPC expansion project, using the matching phenomena in our CPC expansion from 2012 to 19, led to over $400 million in new and sustaining services to increase effectiveness across districts in Chicago, in Minnesota and St. Paul, in Wisconsin, and other places, to ensure that these gains are being sustained as well. And so many of these services that we began and partnered with are continuing, and that's created these large investments that are strong. Now, the approach to this service approach was really, our approach was the university community matching approach. So in other words, what we did in a lot of these places to get this level of investment and sustained resources is we put in 50%, the district or the state or the community puts in 50%, and you're getting 100% on your investment, right? Because someone's putting in 50%, someone else is putting another 50%, and you sort of have committed resources and you have shared ownership. And that was our approach to sustaining and scaling in these districts. And it was very successful in both Chicago and St. Paul, and many of those services are still in place. And today, so it isn't just the effectiveness research, it's taking that effectiveness research and then working in the community to scale services. And just for example, that matching approach has led to an initiative we have this year in Chicago, where again, it's a 50-50. We're putting up 50%, the district's putting up 50%, which they probably wouldn't have put up unless we put up the match. And in those 6 schools, we're promoting small classes, teacher assistants in kindergarten and first grade to provide the continuity perspective that's needed for the next step as well. So that's sort of our service approach. And we think this is scalable and creatively and innovatively can fund and help expand services, further beyond the investments that are already existing. I'm going to turn it now over to Judy to say a little bit about the service mission or the training mission in HCRC.
Hello, everybody. This is Judy Temple. I'm an economist at the Humphrey School, and I want to talk about 2 things. One is our summer research interns program. So last spring, we announced this summer program. We were going to bring in 2 or 3 students to work with us all summer, 20 hours a week. And we really wanted them to focus on the key essential elements of program effectiveness in early childhood, and also we were welcoming interest in structural inequality and child well-being. So we had a whole bunch of applicants, and we happened to have chose 2 Humphrey students, Joe Rutkevich and Nyati Panchal, and they've been working with us all summer. They had their own interests in these key essential elements. Joe was really interested in collaborative leadership, and Nyati was really interested in parent involvement. And so we're hoping to share their work pretty soon. We're really excited about that program and hope to expand our internship program in the future. And then secondly, I'm the DGS of the Certificate in Early Childhood Policy. It's a graduate certificate. It says, can you move forward the slide? It's 12 credits. There you go. And we have students, these graduate certificates we have at the U, sometimes students are already enrolled in degree programs and they're getting a certificate. It's actually easier to get a certificate than if you get a minor. The requirements are a little bit easier. And also we have people from the community who are not enrolled students are coming in as non-degree students to get their certificates. And you can go to the next one, Arthur. So this early childhood policy certificate, there's a lot of electives in there. So it really can fit the needs of students in different departments around the university. There is one required course on early childhood policy. I teach another course on the economics of early childhood at the Humphrey. That's an elective. There's a bunch of really good electives for this certificate. And we're really excited. In recent years, we've had Representative Pinto teach this policy class. And he brings to us this really great combination of interest in research and knowledge of policymaking. And so we're interested in expanding, enrollment in the certificate. We have a funding partner who would be interested in paying for part of some certificates. These certificates are, if you're not a student, the certificate costs about $10,000, any of these certificates at the U. And we know that people who are in early childhood tend to not be terribly well paid. And for those interested in additional, graduate study, we'd like to partner with, a community partner to get some funding to bring in a small cohort of these certificate students. All right, that's all I had to say.
Okay, great. Thanks, Judy. And so I think this work, sort of the research and training and service mission, sort of links up to sort of partnerships that we can work on with the state and other partners and the like. And I think it just to finish up, and so some of the work we do to do this collaboration is sort of the funds, the Lorraine Sullivan Fund, our Innovation Fund, and also our Evidence Matter Fund to focus on this evidence that's going to be coming soon from HCRC. So with that, I want to talk about some of the larger state collaborations and the works going on. I'm going to stop my share now and then just turn it over to Lisa Barnidge, who is the enterprise lead in Department of Human Services, former co-director of the Office of Early Childhood Services in MDE, to take it away here and talk about some of the work and data sharing and data integration that's happening in the state and further collaborations. Lisa, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Arthur. Yes, hi everyone. As I try to figure out how to still see you while sharing my screen, if you'll give me a second. As Arthur mentioned, my name is Lisa Barnidge. I actually have an early childhood policy certificate. Might have been one of the first students, or at least in the first couple of years, because that was quite a while ago. And as Arthur mentioned, so my whole career with state government started with probably that course that Pinto was teaching, although it was Nora Slavic that taught it back then. And the supervisor at the Department of Education at that point, she came in and was looking for an intern, and as part of your master's, you do need to have an internship. So I started at the Department of Education in early childhood with that policy certificate and as an intern, which then grew into about 10 years of my 16 years in state government have been at the Department of Education Prior to PDG, we had the Top Early Learning Challenge Grant, which I was the project manager for. I also helped bring up the Early Learning Scholarship Program. And then, as Arthur mentioned, I was recently serving as the interim director for Early Learning Services. I do, though, work at the Department of Human Services. My work in early childhood and bringing up the Early Learning Scholarship Program really highlighted for me the number of early childhood programs we have across state agencies and local communities that really are not as connected and integrated as they could be for families and young children. So I was presented with an opportunity at the Department of Human Services, not just to work in early childhood, but to work even broader across the human services. It's very difficult, the terminology of human services. It's the human services, which include the whole gamut of child care assistance, economic support, foster care, child welfare and protection, health care, disability care for people with disabilities. I'm still I've been at DHS for 4 years, and still there's so many programs here that are serving a lot of Minnesotans, and they are not well coordinated, as Arthur is mentioning about early childhood programs themselves. So today I thought I would just take some time to kind of give you a highlight of what we're doing at the Department of Human Services to better coordinate services to support the whole family, taking a multi-generational approach and really working with communities to better support people where they are at. Okay, now I gotta figure out how to move my screen. I assume you can see my slides, and they did just forward one. Okay, great. So this kind of slide was the whole slide that made me really interested in moving and helping the Department of Human Services in their journey towards a future state, acknowledging that currently the human services system is very difficult to understand, as well as very unfriendly to navigate. All applications are separate. You need to apply multiple times, provide the same information multiple times to different people without really understanding perhaps what services you're going to have at the end. So the vision Department of Human Services, as well as counties and tribal nations, have been working on together is to create a more coordinated, easier and accessible system that really also leverages technology that people are expecting to interact with in their daily lives. The model that I'll be presenting here in a couple minutes was developed with a working group with DHS and counties and the wider nation specifically. They created and developed a shared understanding of our goals and values and the needs to integrate our services. And then they developed a business model for achieving this in our future and informing our modernizations as well as transformation of our human services delivery system. I'll move forward. So really the goal being that we would provide all Minnesotans with access to a streamlined human services system with the principles that it is holistic, culturally appropriate human services that meet individual and family needs. It empowers people to determine what they need and establish their own personal goals. Leverages information and gives people access and control over their information, who they want to share it with and how they want it to be used, and the ability to update it as needed. And then obviously leveraging data and information to ensure that the services that we're providing are of high quality and helping people meet the goals that they have set out for themselves. The integrated system really is looking at how across programs we do a lot of the same functions. So this kind of shows the process at which a person really kind of goes through when applying for any human service, and how we can streamline that flow as well as coordinate it across program types. Beginning with screening, a social needs tool that can help people see what kind of services they might be available, using that information to refer them to a variety of services at DHS, as well as in their communities, or actually other local agencies as well. Though the eligibility, sometimes you do need an assessment, so there's that purple bubble for if that specific service requires an assessment, but then would lead us into actually a place where someone could actually have all the services that they're receiving coordinated and be able to, variety of different people to be able to access that and make sure, kind of as in a different OLA report, that we are coordinating services and not duplicating services. We also really plan to include analytics throughout this whole flow so that we can measure what the outcomes are. We can do continuous improvement in our processes, as well as identify services that might support other certain communities or populations specifically, so that it can be fed back up into perhaps that referral process. Given some of your demographics, these services may meet your needs more than others. So that's the long-term vision and goal that we're looking at putting together. We're also using a human-centered design approach to this. We've really been working with user groups and stakeholders to consider what we need to think about when developing these concepts. We have leveraged and engaged work that is really iterative. We bring out information for feedback, we bring that back, and then use that to improve what we share the next time around. And I wanted to talk specifically of a couple things that we've been doing with our community engagement. We've worked with a partnership of counties to prototype our ideas with county leadership. We've worked with about 30 staff across a variety of program areas in 10 different counties. We also have been working with tribal nations. There's been a core team of tribal leaders that have been developed, and we meet with them periodically throughout the year in several sessions to gain their feedback and understanding of what tribal nations might need, as well as they are our partners and deliver some of our services as well as other services within their nation. And we also have recently been working with the Wilder Foundation. They have, over the last year, been working with us to complete feedback. We've done personal interviews. We have done a survey on the internet. Our interviews, we've interviewed approximately 40 community members. Our survey, we got about 2,000 respondents over the summer to our survey. And they've also done some literary research around what other research has said, people need in these types of programs, and helping better coordinate them. We also have internally, we've been working on user experience design, and we've developed approximately 28 personas to help us understand the journey of a variety of different clients through our system to help us better figure out where those pain points are and what are the things that we need to be working on. So we're really looking at this beginning part. If you remember, the full flow is the upfront part is what we're working on at the moment. Really thinking about a new front door to all of our services. I know for a long time people have said, you know, no wrong door. And we're trying to really bring that together in this development of a new front door. It needs to be accessible and interactive. As I mentioned before, you know, tools that people are expecting to interact with in their daily world. Have quick social needs questionnaire. So kind of leading back to Arthur's comments on social determinants of health, we really are using social determinants of health in this process as well. The social needs tool in part helps us to identify some of those additional determinants as we think about what services might be most beneficial to the person at our door. And then really having this like connective tissue once you have filled out the questionnaire, and it's a short questionnaire that we've been working on, connecting you then to, as I mentioned before, referrals to our services or to other services that might be located in your community. And it also, we really understand that it needs to be complementary to existing pathways. So this is not getting rid of county offices and local people that you can interact with personally, but knowing that as technology increases, as well as transportation may become more difficult, how can we meet people where they're at? But also knowing that not every population is, or every geographic area in the state has the same access to technology, knowing we still need to have people managing interactions as well and really supporting people through this process. So really thinking across different modalities depending on what a person's need is. So as I mentioned, we're really working in the front half of our data for our system flow at the moment. We have been thinking about a website, a better website for people to find information on our programs, attaching that with a social needs tool to help them identify what programs might best meet their needs. And then that will route them to a new application process, which we are growing to include more and more programs in order to have a common application and reduce the time that people need to be applying for different programs. And that's actually rolling out on Election Day next week. So please keep your fingers crossed for a successful rollout of it in benefits. It's currently been piloted in a handful of counties, as well as at least one tribal nation, Mille Lacs, and it's going to go statewide next week. And to talk a little bit more about MN benefits, this is actually a tool that we have created with Code for America, the counties, Minute, and the tribal nations. As I mentioned, it's been rolled out to a variety of counties and tribes already. We've had over 30,000 applications over the last year. It's mobile friendly. It averages around 12 minutes for someone to actually fill out the application, which our current applications can take up to 60 minutes. We actually have a text survey on it at the end of it, so we can actually gain information back from users on their satisfaction when they're finished with the application. As you can see here, we have approximately more than 70% that report that they're happy with the application. You can, because it is mobile, you can easily upload documents. You can, just like you do for other things, take a picture of it on your phone and upload it, which can help us ensure your application is completed sooner, allowing you to receive access to services sooner as well. You do not have to have an account for registration. It's accessible. It's currently only in Spanish, and that's partly because we're just piloting it, but we will plan to add additional languages as it becomes more of a statewide and finalized I'm going to say, product. And we are also looking at possibly, as Amanda will talk about, bringing other services and programs into the application here in the future. One last thing that I also thought you guys would be interested in knowing, in all of this work, I've brought up data a couple times. We also are looking, we actually have, this is our data strategy, and we're about to kick it off. Some of the work is already underway, but we're also looking at kicking off some additional new strategies here in the next year. But really, one of the main priorities I was given when I came over was, how do we work to manage and govern our data better in order to make all of this happen? And I'm sure those of you who have tried to work with state governments on accessing data, you will find that even if you can get through the difficulties of accessing the data, you might find that the data is not as managed or governed as well as you might like if you're trying to do research on it. So for example, our data strategy really is about how do we find our data, because we have over 30 major systems, and that doesn't include all our minor systems. How do we understand our data? Because the data in each system, although it might be labeled the same, does not always mean the same thing. How do we trust our data? Depending on when the data was last updated or who's entering it, the quality of the data could be variable. How do we ensure that we're in compliance with the data? We do, especially the Department of Human Services, have a lot of different laws under our data sets. We have everything from HIPAA to welfare to public data, and those are different laws that govern those. And so really making sure if we know it, we know where it's coming from and we can understand what it is, it's going to help us be better in compliance. Standardizing that data so that we can integrate it better. And when we put date of birth in one system with date of birth in the other system, we know that it's the same date of birth. Making really clear about who can make these decisions. Again, once we know what the data is, we can also then understand better who it belongs to and what kind of decisions we can make on that. And then we really, having all that in place really helps us to be able to share that data better, because we are confident in what the data is, the quality of that data, the decisions we can make with that data. And as you can see down here at the bottom, really being able to expand the use of that data. And knowing with all this new technology, how can we adapt quickly to changes, not only in the data we need, but in the technology collecting it. And lastly, all of this will help us better share that data appropriately with external stakeholders. So this is the kind of a crux of a lot of our work as well. We can put a lot of bells and whistles out on the front end side for clients to hopefully make it easier for them. But really, for us and for the clients, we need to make sure our data is well managed, because they won't trust us if we can't manage this data in a way that's easily accessible and that they can have some more control over it. So that is the end of my PowerPoint slide. But I know we're going to turn it over to Amanda, and then I think we'll be open to questions for Amanda, Arthur, and I more about collaboration and use of data to help improve services to people across the state.
Sounds good.
Lisa, thanks so much. Amanda, take it away.
Sounds good. And Lisa, as you were giving your background, I was kind of chuckling because mine is very similar. I went to the Humphrey School, got an early childhood policy certificate, got an internship at the Department of Education, worked under Lisa's leadership on the Race to the Top grant. I also worked on the school readiness study, which Lisa worked on. Also worked on early learning scholarships under Lisa's leadership. And then have continued to work at the Department of Education and now lead our preschool development grants. So that kind of made me laugh. And now Lisa and I are collaborating from our different positions as well. So, and excuse me, I have a cold, so hopefully I don't have a coughing attack during this, but like I said, I manage our state's preschool development grant, which is a partnership between education, health, and human services, as well as the children's cabinet. And its overall goal is to try to coordinate our early childhood systems across agencies to make it easier for children and families to get what they need. Preschool is a bit of a misnomer in this grant because it really is about prenatal through age 5 plus their families. So really thinking a whole family approach. There are 4 main grant activities, and I'm going to dive into 2 just to kind of piggyback on this data theme for today. So I'll very quickly talk about 2 of the activities that I won't go into detail on, but we did a lot of community engagement during our initial planning grant. And a couple of the themes that we heard is that we really need to invest in community solutions. And so we have grants that go specifically to organizations that are led by and serving BIPOC populations to solve challenges that they see in their communities. And so those are community solutions grants out of the Department of Health. We're also piloting community resource hubs. And so these are local collaborations. They don't cross the entire state. There are 12 of them plus an unfunded partner in different parts of the state. And what they do is that they provide that in-person navigation to families as they're seeking services. And then also our spots for collaboration and community developed solutions, and our feedback loops to the state so that we can continuously be learning what's happening at the local level to be responsive in our policies, our practices, and our programs. And then the 2 projects that I am going to talk about are Help Me Connect, which is an online navigator tool that we have at the state, and then also some of our technology to coordinate eligibility and services. So like I said, we did a lot of community engagement. We talked to over 1,300 folks throughout the course of our initial grant, which was in 2019, and a top theme far and away was navigation and how complicated it was for families to access services. And specifically, there was a lot of call out on, I have to tell my story again and again to different people. I have to tell it to the county, to the school, to the Head Start, to the community provider. It is exhausting, and I actually only go in when I desperately need help, was a very common theme. And so when we dug more into this, one of the barriers that wouldn't be surprising to you all is actually legal barriers. So people are telling their stories again and again because our systems aren't set up that we can share information across them in order to streamline it for children and families. So a first step that we did is a joint powers agreement. So this is a legal agreement that we currently have between education, health, and human services, that we can share data, like application type of data, between our state agencies for the purposes of coordinating eligibility and services. This has a lot of limitations to it, so it can't be used for research, it can't be used for detecting fraud, it can't be used for any criminal prosecutions, and it really is only between our state agencies and not at the local level. So I just want to be clear on the limitations. And I'll say that this is a first step, and right now we're kind of finding that fine line of when we have a specific use case for sharing data, what else do we need? Because we still, like Lisa was talking about on that last slide, we still need to make sure we have a lot of data protections about who has access to the data, for what reason, for how long, what data elements are being shared. So it does give us some initial, it helps us go further faster by doing some of this legwork on the front end about having an agreement across our agencies. And then, so the legal piece is one, then technology-wise, for the preschool development grant, it's kind of boiled down to 3 main buckets that we're pursuing in order to coordinate eligibility and services. So Lisa talked about MN benefits. So in our in our original application for the preschool development grant, we wrote that we were going to create a common application because we heard this from families throughout the state that they desperately wanted a common application. As soon as we were funded, we found out that DHS had just also been offered this really great opportunity to create a common application. So no interest in creating multiple common applications at the state. So what the preschool development grant is now able to do is take this fantastic work that DHS has been doing, which like this is, you can apply to many cash benefit programs. And right now the average time is 13 minutes, which each of those individual programs used to take over an hour. And so like Lisa said, this is going statewide next month and is just an incredible feat by the DHS team. So with the preschool development grant, we'll be able to expand it to more state agencies. We're also working on a referral form as a part of Help Me Connect. So I mentioned that Help Me Connect is a tool that is an online navigator. You can look up, I live in War Road, Minnesota, and I'm looking for mental health services, and it will say what services are available in War Road, Minnesota. The next step is to build an actual referral form so that not only are you just looking it up, but you can get directly referred to the services which you're looking for. So that is the next step with that one. And then the next one is categorical eligibility. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But like I said, for the expansion of MN benefits, our plan is to both support renewal function. And so there's a lot of churn is what they call it, but a family needs to not only apply for the first time, but then they need to re-demonstrate their eligibility for the program on different cycles for different programs. But so this renewal would be able to do that within the application as well. So that's one expansion of MN benefits, and then we'll be starting the research phase with WIC and early learning scholarships. And there is a long list of other programs that we're interested in exploring, and we'll see what makes sense as we start the research. And as I mentioned, Help Me Connect is this online navigator where we'd be building the referral form. And Lisa mentioned the social needs tool that they're developing as well. And just to point out, kind of her team and our team meet very frequently on how our projects can collaborate. So you see a really good example of collaboration with MN benefits, but then also with the social needs tool. And so just yesterday we were talking about some aligning our data elements so that we can plan for future integration. But I really think of Help Me Connect in the same way that we think about the senior linkage line, where it's very specific to our early childhood population and their families. So just to point out that distinction and to let you all know that we are working together. And then finally is categorical eligibility. So this is when an individual or a family are determined to be eligible for one program based on their participation in another program without having to additionally consider their income or other resources. And so what we're hoping to do, and this graphic is for demonstration only, I don't look too closely at it, but what we're hoping to do is to be able to make some linkages either through what we call a service call from one data system to another system, or securely sharing reports to be able to say, okay, you are in this program, which means we can demonstrate your eligibility for this program, and the burden isn't on the family to have to demonstrate that themselves. So this almost circumvents some of the application process itself. So those are the three main actions we're taking as far as the preschool development grant, and that's all I had for slides, but those are the primary things we're doing around eligibility and service coordination. So with that, I will stop sharing and happy to take any questions for any of us.
Yeah, no, thanks, Amanda, very much. And so I'd like to just open it up. People can put in the chat questions they'd like, but I just want to, open it up to people to ask any questions to the three. And thanks so much, Amanda. Really covered a lot. We have a few minutes and we can take more time.
This is Connie Fields, and I'm in Alexandria, Minnesota, and I've worked with Amanda on the preschool development group, development grant. I did many focus groups locally, and the conversation really focused on a one-stop shop for clients. How difficult it was, especially out in rural. There is some in the metro, but in rural Minnesota, they have to drive from resource to resource. And that makes it difficult for families to apply for programs. So I'm really glad that the MDE and DHS are talking. Now, if we could get MDH in with you guys, it would be really good. So continue to work so that people have a one-stop shop. Thank you.
Thanks, Connie. And MDH is the ones who are leading Help Me Connect. So they're fully in on this as well. Yeah, I thought, and Lisa might remember more of these stats than I do, but of the common application, some of the things that they were finding is that a pretty big percentage of people are applying for benefits outside of business hours too. And so I think just to your point of people driving all over the place and knowing people's schedules is by having this DHS's great work on the common application is really making it more accessible when people can apply at any time from anywhere on their phone. It's great stuff.
That's great.
Other
questions?
This is Troopy. Yeah, this is Troopy Starley. I had a quick question. One, I think this is really, the Common App looks awesome. Like just thinking about some of the problems that are out there and the needs. So really excited about this work. You, Amanda, on one of your slides, you said you're moving into the research phase. Can you say more about what that means and really how you define the word research, really?
Yeah, and Lisa, feel free to chime in here too. But the contractor that we've been working on for MN benefits is called Code for America, and they work in a human-centered design process. So they do research sprints prior to determining what the technology solution is. And so for the application to date, they actually went in and observed county workers in how they were processing applications. And then they did interviews with people as they were applying to better understand the system prior to coming up with a solution. So it could be that it doesn't make sense for WIC to be a part of a common application, but it makes sense for them to be integrated in some different way. So it's not making assumptions on what the solution is. Anything you'd add to that, Lisa? We're correct.
No, I think you're right on target there.
I wondered, there may be other questions as well. I wondered about the systems because I think you guys are really, struck this note about the systems and the navigation aspect of the states and how states are trying to be better at navigating, providing access to services so that there is more integration and quality. But could you speak to really, in the end, it's the outcomes, right? Because you're increasing access by making navigation easier. And then there's the integration and alignment of services, say kids getting WIC and then early Head Start, then Head Start or homeless services. If that's alignment, so that means there would be more support for that family across those important stages. And then at the end, you'd see better outcomes. So where are the phases in terms of the outcomes? Because that's where the evidence matters comes in. Can you just describe maybe the MDE and DHS approach to making sure that in the end, the outcomes are getting better, and that I think is a role potentially for partnerships with the university to help ensure that that's the case. So it's sort of your take on that would be helpful.
I can speak up a little bit, Arthur, for what DHS has been doing. So the model that I presented actually is a couple iterations beyond the original one. But when we were working on the first one, we had a person in the counties require us to write at the bottom, and you'll see it. It's one of the nuggets at the end, but the use of data throughout is a guiding principle, or definitely a requirement in our model. excuse me. And I think what we have found, though, is we can't even begin to really evaluate that at this point in time because to access the data is so difficult. So that's where our data strategy is really coming into place, is that getting people from different program areas in the same room to start having discussions about what is the data we actually have, what does it mean, is it the right data we should be collecting, and then looking at that to kind of come at it two ways. I mean, I do think it's really important that we know what our evaluation questions are, but I think at this point we don't even know really, we don't have baseline data. So we're kind of, I guess, coming at it from two different directions of getting the data better, improving the data so that we can start to understand what are the current pain points. And actually, I guess that's a little bit too where our personas come from. But what is the current level of services we're providing so that we know what we can measure going forward? One other thing that we have that I didn't include is we have recently brought up two different divisions. One of them is regarding change management and one of them is evaluation. So the evaluation team will be looking at what are the questions that we should be asking and kind of coming from that direction of it. And then our change management team is also helping us through, obviously, the management of this change at all levels, because some of the change management actually needs to even just happen internally, program staff level, as well as, you know, all the way out to the providers that are providing the services. So it's not a small undertaking, but it is something that we are trying to include in this upfront work so that it's not something which happens a lot with data that ends up being an afterthought. And then you're trying to fit things in.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Amanda, from the MDE side, how do you see that in terms of ultimately the outcomes are getting better? That's the whole point, right?
That's the hope. So I just have a very quick answer to it. So far as right now, we're looking on how to utilize our early childhood longitudinal data system and what questions we would need to be asking of that system in order to see if this coordination of eligibility and services is impactful. So just starting those conversations, but hoping to utilize the ECLDS.
Yeah. And they're all, I mean, either of you could comment on the role, say, in terms of role of research, the role of the university. How can universities or other research partners be helpful in the state in transitioning to this more universal systems of access, whether it's pre-K, if the bill passes in some capacity, or other things, other thoughts or sort of recommendations there you would have?
Looking at,
you know, because in the end,
yeah,
it's back to also the Legislative Audit Bureau, because again, there's very clarity that Minnesota is not evaluating its preschool programs.
Yeah, right.
And there's no requirement to report data. And so the idea that you could take a cohort, and some of the conversations I've had with Lisa and others, and we've done collaboration work with MDE where you could take a specific cohort of state families and then sort of follow their services and look at outcomes in a constrained way, and don't wait for every integration and navigation system to be up. Look at existing data and take a slice of it to better look at this effectiveness question. And that would be, I think it's doable, and there's been proposals on that front.
Oh, I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll go ahead real quick. Yeah, I was going to say, as I know you and I have talked, I do think that there is potential for collaboration with organizations like the U because of our own limited capacity to actually evaluate and review our data. I know at DHS, being kind of in this enterprise perspective, I don't really own any of the data, and it's really difficult for me to find data experts to work with that have the time to actually answer questions. So I definitely think, especially too, is if DHS is interested in understanding what services are working and what services we should be expanding, even, where should we start? Where can we make bigger impacts? Working with organizations like VU would be really helpful for us to make better decisions based on information.
Great. Go ahead, Judy.
Oh, I just had a question about the rollout of the Common App for WIC and the scholarships. WIC is, infamous for being just hard to get. It's just very the administrative burden is significant. I'm wondering, is there a plan, will the Common App be just rolled out for the whole state, or is there a plan to roll it out in certain regions?
I don't know. So how I would imagine that it would be a slower rollout. So two answers, I guess. One is that the current common application is going to be live in a week. So with the existing programs, how Code for America has developed this application is that I think they started with 7 counties and then they expanded it to 12 counties and more. So I imagine that they would continue with like a pilot group of folks for their rollout if they choose to integrate WIC and early learning scholarships. And that's why I say we enter the research phase, because Judy, you're right, that WIC is a notoriously complicated program, and it also takes some federal permissions in order to move forward with this plan. And so we need to figure out what's the best way, like what should be included in the application, but it is where we've committed to starting the research phase. But it would start as a pilot, and I think the current scope of the Code for America work would end in, or this future iteration would end in spring 2024. I'm pretty sure is what we slated it as.
How are the other category programs like Head Start or voluntary pre-K or School Readiness Plus? How is that addressed in the system in comparison to, say, scholarships or WIC?
Yeah, so it's a little bit more complicated because there's so much local control of those programs, and so each Head Start agency and school district, to an extent, can set what their requirements are for eligibility into their program. Unlike early learning scholarships, which has standard eligibility requirements and not nuanced regionally. And so again, that's where like entering a research phase, because there could be an opportunity to share, okay, here are the minimum standard of requirements across all programs, but we need to learn more.
Great, that's very helpful.
Or Lisa, anything you'd add? I saw you light up.
No, yeah, you pretty much covered what I would have also said.
And you see moving forward, so the collaboration among health, human services, and education, that's going to be continuing. Obviously, there's collaboration now for both data sharing and for systems and for outcomes and research. Do you see that better aligning over time?
Yeah, I think, under Race to the Top, we set up a lot of foundational collaboration between our 3 agencies that has just strengthened over time. And so I think it's beyond the data and program coordination, but also like our governance structure is, it includes a lot of collaboration points between the agencies as well. So, and it's not just those 3 agencies. Of course, the Children's Cabinet's highly involved, but there's a lot of collaboration with DEED, and we're even working with the Department of Natural Resources on a couple of projects, and Commerce with their energy assistance program. So seeing a lot of collaboration across agencies.
Great, great. There's a lot more to go, and I think it's great. And I think, as I say, we at the HCRC and others are certainly really interested in, helping however we can. And I think some proposals that have come forward, I mean, maybe just further conversation would be great, but you really gave us a great overview of the systems work that's going on in Minnesota. Thanks so much. I would say the end here, if there are other questions, people can get in touch with Amanda and Lisa just through the presentations, because we'll post the presentations and you'll have a recording of it. And feel free to follow up. I really appreciate it. So Amanda, Lisa, thanks so much for giving us a whirlwind tour of the state's work in here and also some of the evidence coverage from HCRC. And so thanks everyone. And we'll talk soon. And